The Bobby O Show.
Welcome to the Bobby O Show. My name is Bobo Potsner, and have I got a great show for you today. The election that just took place on November 7th is very important, always very important, but especially this year, the success of the Democratic Party, which we'll talk about in a few moments, was really striking. I think it's the first Democratic mayor in about 22 years. But the key to our democracy and the key to local elections is grassroots involvement. And that's the story, and that's part of the key to American democracy. And today we have three people, all from the same family, very young people, even mom's a young lady, are involved in politics in the city of Danbury. And I want to talk to them today about their involvement in the political scene of Danbury, Connecticut, and also their lives, because they go back historically for many, many years, because their grandparents and father, respectively, have been involved in this community. So I want to welcome to this show today, Luisa Britton. Hi, Luisa. Her son, Joseph Britton.
Hi, Bob.
And his little sister and her daughter, Cristina Britton.
Hey, the Bobby O.
Hey, how you doing? And Cristina, by the way, is my videographer. And if you like the opening and the closing of the show, she's the one who took the pictures, and she's the one who insisted that one particular slide not get eliminated. But they're very great people, and I know them well, and I have a lot of respect for them. Welcome aboard, folks. I want to start, and I'm going to go with Luisa, to talk about the historical perspective of the Britton family. Actually, your maiden name was the Goddess, correct, Luisa?
That's correct.
And your father and mother came to Danbury in the late 40s. Is that about right?
They, excuse me, they came to this country in late 50s, 1957. We moved up to Danbury probably 1970.
And your your father and your mother owned what restaurant?
Angelo's Pizza. It was on the corner of South Street at Colpin. Well, it originally was across the street in front of Nee James, where there was that building, and then they moved across the street too.
And I first met you at that restaurant. You were the waitress who took care of me and brought me delicious pizza. Candy Ann, let's show a couple of pictures of the historical perspective on the Britton family, actually the Zagatas family. That's mom, right? And that's your dad. And there is again at the old pizza place, right, Luisa?
Early 1970s. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's your dad making the pizza.
Yep, that was in the new place where the building is now. Yep.
That's the sign.
Yep.
Luisa, my family owned a bakery business in Shelton, Connecticut, and we had it for about 57 years. My grandfather had it. My father had it. I worked every Saturday night in my high school years and even before that, because Saturdays and Sundays were big days. And I learned great values in working in my family business. Well, you have that same opportunity working in your family business. Tell me the things that you learned in operating whatever role you had in the business, and the fact you were contributing to your family's food on the table.
Yeah, well, we didn't have much of a choice, whether we wanted to help out or not. It was just a part of what we did. So, I was very young when I started, just helping out, whether it's cleaning tables or answering the phones and selling pizza or doing whatever, we could do to be a part of it, because that business was our lives. That was our livelihood. So everything that we knew that everything that happened there was, part of our future.
I had the same experience. I wasn't given a choice. It was either go to the bakery and work tonight or go to the bakery and work tonight. Right. I had a third choice, go to the bakery and work tonight, but those are my three choices.
Yep.
I'm going to get back to you in a little bit, Luisa, about what you're doing politically, but I want to go with Joe first. And Joe, give us a little bit of background of what you're doing now and how you first got involved in politics.
Sure. Yeah. So I was very, very grateful that on Tuesday night I got elected to my second term on the Danbury City Council, representing the Fourth Ward here in the city. First got elected to the City Council in 2021. But if you want to go back to my first involvement in politics from the start, it started really in fall of 2015, the local election of 2015. I was doing a semester at WestCon, and I was looking for a way to get involved, really. And I talked to my mom, and my mom was like, "Oh, you need to call your councilman," who at the time was Tom Sadi. And Tom Sadi, who then became Commissioner of Veterans Affairs for the state of Connecticut and is now a Connecticut district judge, held lawn signs, made phone calls at Democratic headquarters. And then 2 years later, 2017, after the election of Donald Trump the year before, I was really energized to get more involved locally. So I ran for city council in Danbury for the first time. I lost, but that was when I met Roberto Alves, now Mayor-elect Alves, Farley Santos, now State Representative Santos, Frank Salvatore, now Councilman-elect Salvatore, and a couple other folks. And we all ran together the first time, didn't know really what we were doing. Then ran again.
You learned fast.
We learned fast because then, 2 years later, I ran again in 2019, that time for the Board of Education, and we all ended up winning a elected office. And then obviously 2021, Roberto runs for mayor the first time. It comes up just a little bit short. But then, 2023 comes by, and it was really just a big learning curve. And, I'm loving what I'm doing right now.
Joe, we're going to come back to that in a second. I just want to mention you are a graduate of Danbury High School, correct?
Sure am, 2014.
And you graduated from college where?
So my undergrad from the College of Mount St. Vincent in New York City.
And your profession is?
My profession, I am currently the Board of Education counsel for the city of Waterbury.
So you're an attorney licensed to practice law in the state of Connecticut?
Sure am, in my first year.
Okay, let's go to Cristina. Cristina, your background a little bit, please.
Hey there. Well, I am a recent graduate from the College of Mount St. Vincent, like my brother. I graduated there May of 2022. I'm now a second year grad student at WestCon, Western Connecticut State University, and I'm studying one more year in my program to get my master's and my license in clinical mental health counseling in the state of Connecticut and New York.
You're quite a soccer player, are you not?
I am. Been playing soccer since I was 4, played through high school, through college and my undergrad, besides 1 year because of COVID. And then I was lucky enough to be able to have an extra year of eligibility and play in 1 year of grad school last year. So that was really fun.
I was pretty impressed with that because you're a Danbury High School grad and you played soccer for 4 years. You were a captain at your college. And then you played under the new rules. You played an extra year of soccer at WestCon. I actually went to one of your games and I really couldn't hear your voice, although I was 3 miles away when I first got there. When I got to the stadium, yours was the voice I heard.
Yep.
And you've also been involved in politics. We'll get back to you in a moment, okay? And I want to get to Luisa. Luisa, tell me, before you ran for office, tell me how you got involved in political activities.
Well, I think it started after my kids started school. And I started to get involved with the PTO. And I was there for 8 years in various roles in the PTO at the elementary school that they were in, Shelter Rock School. And over the course of my time there, I started to say, well, what can I do in the PTO rather than just, bake sales and fundraisers, and, what can we do to kind of help and change the school system to give them what they need. So, we started many initiatives there. We started working with the city, and I was able to help the grassroots movement was the first referendum and the first school expansion that got us West Side Middle School and some of the other additions to many of the elementary schools that we have there. And I did that until my kids finished elementary school. Then I took a little break and I just kind of stayed on some boards of some youth sports and volunteered my time there. And then it wasn't until my youngest graduated Danbury High School in 2021 that my son, Joseph, said, Mom, why don't you run for the Board of Ed? And I said, no, I'll never win. And he said, do it. I bet you're going to win. And I ran and I won 2 years ago. So I'm in the middle of my, 4-year term right now. So I was not up for reelection this year.
I'm very proud of you being on the Board of Education, and Joe was on previously prior to you, actually almost simultaneously, as I recall. But
we did. Yeah, we shared one meeting together.
That's great. And that's cool. I spent 15 years in boards of education, 9 years in my hometown in Shelton, Connecticut. When I was 24, I got elected for the first term. And then when I moved to Richfield, I spent 6 years in Richfield's Board of Ed. A lot of people complain about the Board of Education being a very hard position, and it is. You'll get phone calls night and day. On my very first issue, you'll laugh at this. I got elected to the Richfield Board of Ed. I was in town for like 3 or 4 months, and there was an opening. And someone said, hey, I heard you were on the Board of Ed in Shelton for 9 years. Why don't you go for the spot? And in that time, because someone stepped aside, you had to get elected by the other board members. And even though I'm a Democrat, there was a Democratic slot because of minority representation, but the Republicans supported me and I got on the Board of Ed. And my very first issue, as people know, Pepsi is in New York State, and a lot of people live in Richfield, work for Pepsi. And the person who left the Board of Ed in the spot I took, her husband worked for Coca-Cola. So my first phone call was, hey, Bob, you don't know who I am, but you got to get rid of the Pepsi machine, Coke machines, and put the Pepsi machines in. So people don't realize, those things come up, but it's a very hard position, as you know, and we'll talk about. I negotiated teachers' contracts, et cetera. But the gratification is wonderful. Joe, talk about your years in the Board of Ed. Wasn't it very gratifying no matter how hard the issues were?
It was, because it's a position that I think you really have the biggest impact on the kids. And, on the city council, sure, it's more big picture, it's more citywide issues, it's more constituent issues. But when I was on the Board of Ed, you really could see the fruit of your hard work. And that hard work was seeing, these kids getting an education. And the moment for me that was just special, and I will never forget, was handing out the diplomas at the Danbury High School graduation, because that's just the proof of the work that you do. And just having a direct impact on kids was the most
one funny story we had was when I was on the Board of Ed. As you know, a lot of towns and cities are moving to have graduation at WestCon. And at Richfield, it was always going to be at the Richfield High School. And we were deciding to move it to WestCon because one year it was so hot. People were sweating and people were getting sick because it was so hot. And some parents came to the Board of Ed saying, you know what, this is truth. You cannot move the high school graduation because it'll ruin my kids' entire life. They're looking forward to it. So, of course, being the consensus builder I am, I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will move up. If the 8th grade class now will be the first class to graduate from high school at WestCon. So they have 4 years to get ready for it. But those are kind of the funny stories that come up, but there's very serious issues that get involved. I want to go to Cristina, because Cristina is the younger one. In fact, Cristina, I was on the Board of Ed in Shelton when I was your age, 24-ish. But you were involved in a different perspective in political activities in Danbury. I believe you're a member of which political party right now?
Independent Party.
Right. And does the Independent Party normally make recommendations for who they want as an endorsement for candidates for positions in town?
Absolutely, yeah.
And were you involved in that process?
I was, yep.
And did any lawsuits evolve from that activity?
Wow, funny that you mentioned that. Yes, it did.
Okay, absolutely. Tell me the story as to what meeting you went to and how there became litigation.
So basically, August 11th, the Independent Party, we had a meeting at the Marin Hotel in Danbury to nominate to vote for the nominee in the mayor election and all the list of candidates to follow. And as we get to the hotel, everybody who's registered independent signs in, and you get a note card just to make sure that you are a registered independent. So we all walk into this room, we all have our yellow note cards, and the executive board is right at the top. They get the meeting started, and a meeting that you'd think should run pretty smoothly. We're there for one reason, and it is to vote to nominate who we want for our mayoral nominee and to represent the Independent Party. And at the time, there was a group of unruly people who were not supposed to be there, but they could be there, but they weren't supposed to be there to vote. So
only independents could vote, right?
only independents can vote.
So if a Democrat or Republican went to the meeting, they could attend, but they had to be silencio usted, por favor. Please be quiet, right? They couldn't
Correct.
talk.
Yep.
And what happened? Did people start doing things they shouldn't have been doing?
Yep. Absolutely.
What happened?
So the head of I believe it was one of the head of the Republican town committees or something like that. He stood up, said, "Oh, this needs to be adjourned." They started citing some things about bylaws, which at the time wasn't the appropriate moment to bring it up. We were there to have this vote. So any other, other circumstances, it wasn't the time to bring it up. But of course, you had people that wanted to be heard that should not have been heard because that wasn't their time to speak. Next thing I know, we're calling for a roll call vote because that's our right. And the Republicans who were there called to adjourn the meeting, which wasn't their right to do. They're not the executive. They're not on the board. They're not the members that were running the meeting. And I'm there with all the other independents, registered independents, and we're just looking around like, what's going on?
Did you finally vote for your endorsed candidate?
So after things settled down and people who were not registered independents were removed because of, I guess, because the Republicans said the meeting was adjourned, it was adjourned in their eyes. So those who weren't independents left and all the other registered independents stayed. And you have Justin Chan, who took over the meeting and did it the correct way. We nominated him to run temporarily the meeting at the time because the independent members who were running it left. So Justin went right through dotting the I's and crossing the T's of what he had to do in the proper protocol for how the meeting was supposed to run. And we nominated all the candidates and we voted and the vote went through and that was it.
And the Republicans filed a lawsuit and lost, correct?
Correct.
Now, see, Cristina, you and Joe, no offense to Lisa and me, are the future of our country. And it is very important because my generation, as far as I'm concerned, has blown it. And by blown it, I mean we have a great country, but things are happening in our country that shouldn't be happening. And I believe it's the younger generation. You're both under 30, and it's critical to have young voices like yours to be leading the way to make up for the mistakes. Today's show is not about the lack of bipartisanship in our country, but we all know what's going on with the Trumpites and Republicans, et cetera, et cetera. But it's up to your generation to take control. Joe, do you find your friends in the late 20 area, are those people involved? Do they know what's going on? Are they following politics generally? I mean, you guys are so involved, and your mom. But how about your friends who don't get heavily involved? Do they know what's going on? What's happening?
Yeah, so I think, that's a good question because I've certainly seen a bit of a shift since the election, I think in 2016, for folks that are at least in my orbit and in my circle. People are paying attention now. I think especially after these really radical rulings coming from the United States Supreme Court. So I think my generation has woken up because, I think the biggest piece of evidence is the midterm election in 2022, where historically speaking, President Biden and the Democrats were on pace for getting absolutely blown away in the midterm elections because that's normally what happens, but it didn't happen. And the reason for that was the younger generation showed up to vote. And I think that is kind of your signal that there's been sort of a complete doctrinal shift in the involvement of the younger generation, something that probably hasn't been seen since, the Vietnam War era. And I'm certainly seeing it, and I think you're seeing it across the country.
Yeah, I think the issue of your freedoms and your rights, it's so contradictory to me to hear Republicans say they're all for freedom, but it's only freedom if you want to do freedom the way they want you to do freedom. And, I'm not a woman, obviously, but the abortion rights issue does not just affect women. When I was in law school, Roe versus Wade had come out a few years before I started law school, and I had a great constitutional law professor named Van Alstyne, We met every day for a whole year. And we spent a lot of time on the Roe versus Wade, Griswold versus Connecticut, which was essentially your right of privacy is what the whole case was all about. And the thing that just shocked me a year ago is that Roe versus Wade did not have to be overturned. If people want to narrow the rights on abortion issues, that case was in the mid 70s, early 70s to mid 70s. And the science at that point in time was different than it is today. So if the Supreme Court had wanted to, they could have done a very narrow perspective on that decision and not overturned it. And traditionally, the Supreme Court, as Joe would know, tries to take the narrowest grounds to make decisions. Unfortunately, the decision has been as it has, and now we have these fights in various states. Many red states are supporting the abortion rights of people to have abortions. And I think, Luisa, for someone like you who's, I know you take your religion seriously, however, my perspective is what I might do if my wife and I want to consider an abortion, that's our decision. But what I might want to do has nothing to do with anyone else on this screen. It's your choices. And Luisa, I want to talk to you about that in terms of the Board of Education. Do you have people who are trying to pressure you to ban certain books or take certain positions? Do you find that kind of difficulty in your experience the last couple of years in the Board of Ed in Danbury?
You know, it's funny because when Joseph had brought this whole notion of me running for the Board of Ed, he said, "Oh, Mom, don't worry about it because the Board of Ed is not very political." Well, I can tell you that has changed. That is not the truth. And yes, those conversations are happening. People need to realize that everything you hear on that national level is trickling down into our local boards of ed. And it's all about, they talk about parents' rights, but it's not their choice to tell a parent to make that choice for all parents. It's my choice to make my decisions for my children. And if there's a book in that library that I don't want my child to read, that's for me. But I can't decide what books your children are reading. And I think that that's the clear distinction here that we have to make when we have these conversations. But the other side doesn't tend to think that way. And so it's frightening, and it's something that, thank goodness, we've won the majority back on the board. So, it's although I'm sure the conversations will continue to happen, it'll be better. We are in a better position to make sure that those things don't come into fruition.
I think Joe might agree with me because he was on the Board of Education, is now in the council position, that when you're on the Board of Education or any position in politics, you're a fiduciary. And that is, you don't do what's best for Bobo Potsner or Joe Britton or Luisa's perspective. It's what's best for the town, what's best for your city. And people lose that. Joe, when I was in the Board of Ed, I was curriculum committee chairman for 2 years. And that was our position in that regard, was to make decisions about buying books, for example. And here's what I did for book buying. We had a superintendent of schools who was in charge of, that's my office calling me, but I'm going to ignore it, Luisa, if that's okay. But the superintendent of schools assistant, who was in charge of curriculum, is the one who would decide the books. And my perspective was, we'd put the books in the Board of Ed room. We'd have them there for a month. You could read them if you want to read them. And out of our 9 members, 8 out of 9 said, we'll skim it a little bit, but whatever the administrator says, we'll do. We had one board member, you can guess which political party he belonged to. It wasn't Democrat, who went through the books and he would make comments. This is 15 plus years ago about this book doesn't say this or does say that, etc. And we would have to overcome that. But now, Joe, you're seeing in the political offices, even the grassroots level, that people are coming at elected officials. No, it's my choice. I'll decide. Besides, I'm paying your salary. And Luisa, how much are you paid as a Board of Ed member?
Oh yeah, big bucks. $0 and 0 cents.
I don't know. Do councilmen get paid at all, Joe?
It's actually cost me money.
Yeah. So people, so Joe, give me a comment, please, about what I've raised or anything you want to talk about what your goals and objectives are for the next year or two, either in the discussion I just had with you or whatever you may want in that regard. Tell me what your perspective is of the next couple of years. What do you want to have? If you can get things accomplished, what do you want to accomplish?
So I think for me, a big thing, and this was something that, Roberto ran on, really the whole ticket ran was education in Danbury, and having a very honest conversation about what fully funding education is. And because we saw a lot of not true statements coming out of the now former administration on the campaign trail about fully funding education. And we saw some of that rhetoric coming out of the administration at the schools as well. But I think a big thing that I want to work on alongside Mayor-elect Alves and my colleagues on the Democrat-controlled city council is to make sure that our schools are really getting the focus that they deserve, and the transparency is there. Because there were a lot of things that the council, when I was in the minority, we were kept in the dark on, related to the education department. And a big part of that is the new career academy. A major fact was that the appraisal, the city ended up paying $20 million more than they had to, and the mayor didn't tell the public. And he had to go to our legislature, our Democratic legislature, to get bailed out and get a partial amount of that $20 million. They got $10 million. And, that just wasn't communicated to the public. But I think the big thing I want to do is just ensure that there's going to be an honest conversation about what fully funding education means and how do we get to the next level and really undo some of the bad things that have happened in the last 22 years relating to education.
The interesting thing is, from my Board of Ed experience, is that people think you have this great control over the budget if you're on the Board of Ed, Luisa. I think when I was last on the Board of Ed in Richfield, I think like 85% of our budget was fixed costs. By that I mean contracts, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. We're going to have you guys back again because we could go on for another half hour on some discussions. But I want to give Cristina, we have 2 minutes left, Cristina, and in 30 seconds, with these great mentors, your brother and your mom, what would you like to see yourself if you had it 5 years down the road or 10? Do you see yourself involved in politics?
I want to, because my goal is to be a counselor, a clinical mental health counselor. And as a counselor, we're supposed to be as unbiased as possible. So I will 100% stay involved in any support they need politically. But for me and a career standpoint, I don't want any sort of reason for somebody to say, oh, she's more on the left, more on the right. I want anybody to be able to talk to me, because as a counselor, I do need to be as biased and in the middle as possible, which is why the independent party really attracted me to it, because
I want to thank you three for coming to this show. We'll have you all back. But the thing that is most positive for me is I see our future, Luisa, in people like Cristina and Joe as being people who will lead our country back to the great years we had before. And I wouldn't call it Make America Great Again, because we're already great right now, but it's having America do the right thing.
That's right.
Luisa, Joe, Cristina, thank you so very much for being on The Bobby O Show. And as you watch the end clip, remember, Cristina filmed the end clip. See ya.